All right. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you all for coming out. We are switching gears again to all of our incessant and interminable wars that are happening right now. Back to Ukraine tonight, which has kind of gone in the back burner for a lot of people now in the last month or so. And on a certain level, I kind of get why. The summer offensive is basically over at this point. And it's muddy season now, well and truly. So, like, nothing really moved dramatically the way it did last year with Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensives. So we're kind of at an impasse at exactly the time that a lot of oxygen got pulled from the media environment over to Israel. But there has been some occurrences, particularly in the south around. I'm going to mess this town name up. There are honest to God, entirely.
Can you just spell it out for me, please?
Andryvik. Andryvka. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. When people say it aloud, it makes
Avdiivka. Sorry.
Yeah, when people say these things out loud, they make perfect sense, like phonetically, and then
yeah, you look at it, and it's like,
and then you're
alphabet soup.
Why? Where did they get all these vowels? Like, was there a NATO shipment of vowels in the '90s to the Eastern Bloc or something?
With Ukrainian, actually, there's it's interesting. A lot of Slavic languages are known for their consonant clusters. So, for example, Polish has a lot of husher consonants. Russian is the same way, not a lot of hushers, but it has more consonant clusters. Ukrainian is actually free of consonant clusters. It doesn't have that in its language. And in fact, you have to, so for example, a preposition in Ukrainian from, it's z. So if you say something, you add a vowel, an E to it. So it's ya z Ukrainian, something like this. So it's, they're actually very, very full of vowels. And when you look at these transliterations of it, you're going to notice more of that.
Well, yeah, even mercifully, Kyiv is pretty easy for the most part.
Kyiv, yeah.
But not like anywhere else, really. It's like every time I just trip over these. But yeah. So insofar as news, I check the map every morning when I wake up because that's around the time that all the reports come in from the Ukrainian General Staff, and they do all of their updates for the day. And like for the past couple days, especially, they've been like just cluster dumping their combat engagements. They haven't been highlighting any specific set. So it really feels like they're just fighting over what they were fighting over before around Bakhmut, and the Tomak region, in the city whose name I can't pronounce that is important today.
Divka.
Yes, like that's it's just the thing about Ukrainian is I look at the transliteration and it just sits there and confuses me. It's entirely my problem.
It should be important to state that Avdiivka has been a frontline town since 2015. It's been under constant combat.
Yeah,
And,
it's probably not appropriate to call it a town anymore.
Yeah, you can, but it was actually one of the most, some of the densest Ukrainian defenses were there. And initially during the on February 2022, when they launched their offensive, that is an area where everything has been very, very slow, and you know, in other areas it was a lot more fluid at the is really well defended. I think now it's been under way, way more pressure than, you know, it has before. So, but
yeah,
the one thing that like Russians aren't really good at least in, you know, in this war, the one thing that the
hang on, Hetman, we are having
Russian military hasn't been able to do is really complete encirclements.
We are having internet issues.
Yeah.
I'm about to go do emergency internet surgery. I'm going to lose my mind with Comcast. I swear to God. Anyway, Verizon to the rescue in the mobile hotspot. Give me a hot second.
Weren't you supposed to get Google Fiber there?
Well, actually, as I was just telling the commander today, we are having some issues with the homeowners association.
About a homeowners association.
No, I think homeowners association are the foremost form of authoritarian government in the world. Let's give this a hot second to switch over. Oh, there we go. I think we're safe again. So, one of the things to say about Avdiivka in particular is it's actually very closely situated to the city of Donetsk, which has been a site. Donetsk, excuse me, has been a scene of combat since the beginning, and since basically when this started in 2014. You have very famously the battles in the airport there that occurred.
Yep. It's also the effectively the capital of one of the breakaway republics.
Yes.
Yeah.
And like relationally, you're basically talking about fighting in a suburb, but again, it's now mostly flat.
Yeah.
And rubble.
Yeah.
But
Donetsk is probably one of the most hostile cities, I would say, in these occupied, in the two occupied republics, or sorry, the two de facto republics. It's probably one of the most hostile to any return of Ukrainian rule. I don't think prospects of taking those cities back of Luhansk and Donetsk are realistic even at this point.
I don't necessarily know about the prospects of taking them back. I would imagine that what it would be is an insurgency if they succeeded.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, they would face a insurgency for sure, even if they were able to.
Which is tragic on a lot of levels because this is a very artificial conflict, especially for them. Like it's very much a result of how Russia shifts people around to justify imperial actions. But yeah, Ukrainian General Staff reported like 61 combat engagements just today, and they just lumped them all together. So like the piece of the puzzle at this point is that this offensive has ended, and it was really hyped up in a lot of corners what Ukraine was going to accomplish, right? And obviously that didn't happen, which is
People had a lot of unrealistic expectations about what was going to happen. That's the main issue. I mean, we had the example of the Kharkiv offensive last fall, which really, I mean, it was really brilliantly done. And also, Ukraine had a very strong force advantage, manpower advantage in that sector at the time. I think, you know, the whole tech fetishism of, you know, that a lot of people have for Western weapons, and like, you know, the fact, okay, if you give Ukraine, you know, 500 Leopard variant tanks, Leopard 2 variant tanks, that they'll be able to, just with these superior weapons, break through really hardened Russian defenses. And that's just,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you know,
People with no real understanding of what's going on or even how tanks are employed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of been something we've been talking about like basically all summer at this point. Is the lack of air
I played
power.
World of Yeah,
the lack of air power was always a concern on my end, because we build these weapons with the assumption that we are able to integrate things into a combined arms force. So we are used to the example of Desert Storm or the early part of April in 2003 in Iraq, which involves massive numbers of American airplanes performing a
We're also
variety.
used to examples like, you know, the 1967 war with Israel, where they were able to use air power and, you know,
where
very
they were able to
quickly.
use air power indiscriminately because they destroyed the opposing air force. Like,
yeah,
and that's the
and
Gulf
it's
War in a nutshell too.
right.
Yeah.
It's once you have not superiority, but air supremacy, you can pretty much do what you want, and you can literally bomb the enemy's forces into oblivion.
Yes.
And that's one of the problems here, is that from the start, not only did Ukraine not really have much of an air force, but the Russians had a very large one. So they should have been able to establish at least air superiority, if not supremacy. But what we found was that the density of air defenses in the frontline region is so heavy that the aircraft cannot be used to maximum effect.
Yeah, like
I think that Russia, you know, doesn't have a lot of experience. A lot of people, you know, you would think that Russia would be able to, with the sheer number of aircraft, I mean, relatively more experienced pilots, be able to, you know, destroy Ukrainian ground-based defenses. But very few militaries, I think, really have a, you know, seasoned experience of doing that. Maybe outside of like the United States, Israel, the UK, I think might, you know, the Royal Air Force might have that experience as well. But yeah, I think Russia's Air Force, it's massive. It's very impressive on paper, but and it's very useful when they're bombing, you know, an enemy that doesn't have a strong air defense, like for example in Syria.
Well, yeah, and I was going to say, if you look at it, the last time the Russians faced an opponent with anything resembling a capable air force was back in World War II.
Exactly. That's the only time that they've fought an enemy that could, you know, fight them back and actually had a, you know, an air defense.
Yes. So like, and to talk a little bit about this, like, because a lot of people don't quite get how this works. So let's go back to Daedalus's childhood. In Huntsville, Alabama, there is a very famous institution which most people have heard of called Space Camp. And Space Camp is basically a NASA styled summer camp for kids, uh, which you can send your children to for a hefty fee of, I think, close to like $2,000 for a week. It's ridiculous. Anyway, down the hill from Space Camp, literally down the hill from Space Camp, if you keep going for a while, you'll hit a little forested area. Then you do a turn off onto this area, and you'll find this basically like almost like a minorly maintained boneyard. But this is actually Space Camp's other cooler brother, called Aviation Challenge. And what Aviation Challenge is a similarly expensive summer camp program, but it's also kind of like an airplane and an aviation museum and an aviation like enthusiast type thing. So, for example, you walk off, and almost immediately when you come off to the left side, there is an F-14 Tomcat that had been used as a prop in Top Gun. There's an AH-1 Super Cobra, and then you come to this pavilion, and there's all aircraft all around. And you come to this pavilion with a little shed attached to it, and then there's a hangar-looking thing off to the side. And this is the camp. And inside the hangar-looking thing, you've got like a barracks for kids to sleep in, and a centrifuge to spin you around and simulate G-forces. Uh, And there are two bays of simulators. There's a little bay of simulators where there's a whole bank of them, and they have little tiny cockpits. And then there's a second bank of like mock F-18 canopies with simulator sits in them. And like throughout the week, you go and you do a whole bunch of crap. And I did this 2 years in a row, both the intermediate and the advanced program. You do a whole bunch of stuff like learn about basic wilderness survival and things like that. But you also spend time in those simulators being tasked with make-believe missions. So among those things that they taught these kids to do is how to bomb targets with iron bombs in a F-18. Um, it's ridiculously hard to hit small things in a fighter jet. You're moving very fast, and you're trying to line up a lead computing bomb site, and like it's absurdly easy though to hit buildings. It's uh like radar installations, guns, and things that are shooting at you. They're tricky to shoot at back in a plane without laser guided bombs and flying up at 20,000 feet where they can't hit you. So like the Russian Air Force is not necessarily bad at what they're doing, but they're not good at the principal component, which is suppression of enemy air defenses,
Yeah.
which takes a lot of practice and work. And you have some kind of really brave pilots that the American Air Force has always had, and the American Navy, who are very good at this. And their job is basically to fly ahead of everybody else, get seen by enemy air defenses, get shot at, so the guy behind them can turn around and shoot back. That's
Yep.
hard
Is
work.
that part of Air Force and naval aviation doctrine? That's something I always wondered how they actually found enemy air defense.
It's you
And
go
actually,
rustle the
that
grass
makes
until
sense
it
now.
shows up.
Yeah, that makes sense now.
That's
I
basically
always
it.
thought it was like done through maybe satellite imagery or
A
spy
lot of
planes or
that
something. But
is how it's going to work now and going forward. For example, the F-22 and F-35 are very unlikely to be seen on radar, but they have such excellent sensor packages and link ups to get information that they can take information real time from satellites and then shoot back. So like it's going to change how air suppression of enemy air defense works, SEAD operations.
Yeah.
I
As
think that
I,
the Mhm.
I was going to say, you have to also look at the equipment that the Russians, for the most part, are using, which is Cold War era stuff.
it's basically the last iteration of the Cold War stuff. So it's like the MiG-31,
Right.
like
But
all these
but
things that are just
the
like
key,
minor upgrades on famous Russian aircraft.
yeah. But the key is that they didn't go in for PGMs that much, precision guided munitions, and so what you end up with is these situations that could look completely bizarre to Western pilots of aircraft or helicopters flying near the front lines and then putting themselves into a low-level climb and firing off their unguided rockets at range. Then the reason they're pointing themselves up is to get more range off of those things, because they know from past experience that if they're stupid enough to venture over the front lines, there's, a 50%, 66%, somewhere in there, odds chance that they're going to get shot down. The U.S., on the other hand, we've developed all of this ordnance can be fired from miles away. It's very accurate. And so, all we have to do is say, hi, I'm here, turn on your radar. Oh, there's the air defense site. Let's blow the crap out of it.
Yes. The other thing I think that to really keep in mind is when we talked about this report early on when it came out. The British military has a fairly robust, been doing a lot of robust think tanking over the Ukraine war, which is sad because it doesn't look apparent that they're going to do anything about it. But they have established really well, particularly the air war, how it's kind of worked and how each side is keeping each other in their own space. And that's heavily affected how this campaign, in particular this summer, worked. Russia had a great deal of time to learn from withdrawing from Kherson and getting whooped in Kharkiv. And so they spent this time building, they're not even great fortifications. Like it wouldn't work really as nearly as well, I think, against, again, an enemy with air supremacy who could get the space they need to deal with the fortifications. But they spent all this time building this fortification network and just absolutely laying the absolute crap out of mines. Absolute crap. So everything, like, all along this line is basically like just tons of minefields now. Any sector
that's nothing new for the Russians. That's literally the whole famous Battle of Kursk, which is the largest tank battle in history. The Russians just built layer after layer after layer of fortifications, and the Germans were dumb enough to say, "Oh, I can drive through there," and basically destroyed the heart of their armored force.
Yeah, and Kursk is another, I think, an interesting case. Like, you'll read accounts at Kursk of Russian soldiers taking a pack of grenades and diving under a German tank as it passes and setting them off. Like, there's a desperation to that defense. That's not really necessarily the case here. But like what happens is Ukraine quickly learned that they cannot hit these with armored assaults the way they were told by NATO forces to do this. So they start breaking into smaller groups, right?
They learned that within a week.
Yes.
I think too. We're mentioning the Battle of Kursk. I think that's part of their doctrine as well. The Ukrainians are fighting. I think that they're people like Zaluzhny and some of their officers, they know of these battles, so they knew that going in.
Hang on a second.
Like the Wehrmacht would be very, very costly for them.
They knew the history.
Yeah, the history for sure, because it's their history too. It's not just Russia's history. It's theirs just as much. A lot of the veterans of that battle are actually from the Ukrainian SSSR, because it's part of that southern front.
Exactly.
Hold a quick second, Hetman, while I wait for the internet to become stable again. I am now really losing my patience with Comcast. This is honest to God infuriating. I'm also losing my patience with the Homeowners Association. Let's see what's happening. Let me check. Let's first. Okay, I think we're still alive. I think we're good. Yeah. No, yeah, there's also a shared history and a shared doctrine here. So like the same thing that you can say of the Russian defenses, you can very honestly say, as at least in my understanding, of a lot of Ukraine's defenses too. Like they have adopted
And
this particular
they're attacking strategy to some extent because
uh
it's an adaptation of what they know of Russian defenses.
yes. So what
Yeah.
they're doing is they're taking little groups like a squad and sticking them in the back of an M113 or a couple
Yeah.
Bradleys or what have you, and a couple tanks, and they drive up and they start to penetrate a defense. And then Russia has allocated the vast majority of their standing artillery to the areas that Ukraine is trying to break through. So the Russians basically just flip out and start shelling the entire like section of line that like 5 Ukrainian vehicles show up at. Uh,
You don't need good targeting if you have enough guns. You just fire them
yes.
all in the general direction.
So you saw a lot of these vehicles, and actually a surprisingly few for what I expected. You see a lot of vehicles getting hit and temporarily knocked out, and the crews have to walk home. Because that's really the principal advantage, I think, of the Western vehicles at this point, is that you're less likely to get like murdered inside one of them. Like
And an equally important side of that is that if you can take back that area where you lost those vehicles, usually they're recoverable and repairable.
yes, and as
Russian
best as I can
vehicles,
tell,
as sure everybody's noticed, tend to just burn to the hull.
yeah, as best as I can tell, uh, Ukraine's done a fairly good job recovering things too.
Yeah.
I'm wondering in the future how this, if it will at all, affect, Russian, tank design going forward. Because really, if anything, what this war has shown is that the whole internal ammo, storage thing with the tank, that's just, I mean, already we knew this, though most of the West has, external ammo storage or like, a separate compartment of some sort. But I
That
mean,
locks and
even
separates
their
from the
most
crew.
advanced tanks, like even the T90M, has this feature.
I think the
So
T14 has the feature. Not that that's relevant
no,
because no one's ever
T14
seen a
does not have
T14.
the internal ammo. I think it's the only one that doesn't.
I think it has an
But
autoloader.
I mean, they don't. Yeah,
Uh, the T14 has a couple other features that are silly, um, quite apart from the fact that it is huge and has a little engine.
Yeah, but the other part is how many of them are there?
I'm pretty
You know,
sure.
probably.
I'm pretty sure there's about somewhere between 8 and 10. We didn't obviously see any
That's what I
last
was just
year
gonna say.
because it was just a single
yeah,
T-34
exactly.
that
It's
drove in the
like
parade.
the Germans building the Elephant or the King Tiger or whatever. You build a small number of them because they're too expensive, but it's a great prestige piece for the glorious leader to see at a parade.
Yeah, but it feels different for the T-14, at least in my mind, because like the Panther and the Tiger and the King Tiger and the Elephant are all tanks being designed and deployed in the middle of well, actually at this point, in almost a forefront war, right, in 1944.
Yeah, yeah.
Russia builds the T-14 in relative peace and safety, and they still can't build that many of them. Like there's a certain part of it that feels different there, and the same thing can be said about the Su-57.
You know what I agree with that. And what is interesting to me is, they've geared their economy now that the war has started towards, a war economy, and they're still not building more T-14s. So
No,
I'm wondering if there's some internal nepotism there, between arms companies, or like some sort of issue, between them, like, corruption doing this. Because I feel like obviously they can produce a lot of these, but I feel like they could have produced more, prior to this war starting, had they actually geared their economy, which points to the fact that Putin started this really thinking he would just roll through Ukraine. he didn't. It was just so stupidly thought out, and then every
Well,
level.
this was a classic case of home before the leaves fall.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just this, no different to than Hitler's sort of view of starting Operation Barbarossa in the summer and not equipping the Wehrmacht or SS units with any winter clothing because they're not going to need it.
Whoopsie.
Yeah.
But I wanted to point something out that I think is important. We've been talking about how the Ukrainians very quickly learned how to adapt their tactics, their doctrine to the situation. When it became apparent within a week, these mechanized assaults are not working as we were told they were going to, we're going to find something new. The flip side of that is the Russians apparently keep using the same broken tactics over and over again.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the literal definition of insanity of repeating the same thing and hoping you're going to get different results.
You see this just now with the Battle of Avdiivka. Several major giant armored assaults, just destroyed by Ukrainian artillery and ATGMs and even mines. That's a very good point, Commander. I mean, they don't learn. It's odd. They seem to learn. They seem to learn how to. They go back to their doctrine when it comes to defense, but in terms of attack, it's just dismal. You can't say it any other way.
Well, actually, just to kind of point out, because I have a bit of understanding of that, I can teach you how to conduct a defense and be useful in a defensive situation in 10 minutes tops. Sit here, don't move very far, shoot at anything in that direction. Done. We're good. Golden. Defense is relatively
and dig your hole
easy.
Deeper.
Yes, keep digging. Just keep digging. Just keep digging. I'll tell you when to stop. No, it's not deep enough. No, it's very easy to teach someone how to conduct a defense to the point that it's not really necessary. Like you're expected to pick it up as a army officer cadet how to conduct a proper defense, but no one explicitly tells you. You're expected to grab the field manual and read through it to make sure you know. No one explicitly tells you. All of the energy is spent on battle drills conducting attacks. This is because attacks are highly circumstantial and difficult to coordinate. And you're starting off you're basically starting these 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids off learning how to do a squad. So they're doing 9 people at a time, and maybe up to 20 if you are doing a patrol. And a lot of people have a really hard time mentally grasping 9. I don't know necessarily what it is because I didn't have that mental block. But some people just have this really hard time applying the techniques and doing these little tiny battle drills like 1A and battle drill 1 successfully. Attacking is much more difficult and complicated. And this is why you see so many different armed forces kind of have this myopic approach to it, where they just gather up a whole ton of crap, concentrate it in an area, and try to push it through. And this is predicated largely on the fact that they haven't had a major war since World War II, if they have had one at all. They haven't had to deal with the technological problems at play. One of the things I think that sets apart a lot of the Middle East from the rest of the world at this point, and Africa too, is they have a lot of experience conducting attacks now. A lot, like 30, 40 years worth of it minimum for most places. But they're very good at it. They have a lot of practice. They're also very good at conducting abnormal defenses, like the Kurds and the Hamas tunnels. It's practice. It really does make perfect in this kind of circumstance.
When you've effectively been at war since the mid-70s.
Absolutely. And in some cases in the Middle East, significantly longer. They have and Russia doesn't really have these experiences the way that the Middle East does. They have they have experience like in Chechnya or what have you, but these didn't shake out the normal way. They shook out in a very
Also, too,
Russian
even
way.
when they go back to their Soviet experience, you know, in the Cold War, they don't have a lot of, you know, good experience with attack, or at least attacking, you know, a well defended force.
Yeah.
You know, you can call. I think that their biggest conventional battles during the Cold War were probably the skirmishes they had in the Chinese border. You know, if we're talking army versus army, and these are maybe battalion-sized battles.
If
Yeah,
that.
So, yeah, if that, and you know, it really shows you that, you know, there's a lot of hype about, you know, Russia's military force. I think that there was probably a lot of hype too about the Soviet army in the 1980s, and I don't really think that they would have done a whole lot better even then than they are now.
there's a very curious phenomena that happens, and this is more of a domestic political phenomena than it is a military analysis phenomena. What we tend to do here in America, no, dog, that's not yours. What we tend to do here in America is simultaneously hype up and downplay the capabilities of enemy forces. Um, so what happens is we instantly imagine a Russia that can invade the United States, while at the same time talking about how inferior Russian equipment is. And this has led to like a lot of weird kind of beliefs that kind of cycle through the ecosystem of people who talk about foreign policy, or weapons is another real big one. They'll play up these Russian tanks, and the Russian tanks are very well designed for a certain thing, but not necessarily what people think they are. Or the other big one that everyone I think has heard is that the AK-47 can be fired, and after you've broken it out of concrete and mud, pulled it out of a muddy river, and it works just fine. First of all, any firearm that you ever possess that you have filled with mud is a travesty, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Of course.
Secondly, do not expect that firearm to be functional after you've poured mud on it. Ever. I don't care what it is. An AK-47 will jam up just as readily as an M16 or an M4. That's just acts, just the facts.
But I think part of what goes on there, and we know this to be true from papers that have been written about it since the Cold War, but during the Cold War, one of the things was you always upplayed how great Soviet equipment was, and then you downplayed the capabilities of the average Russian soldier, because if the equipment was bad, really good, you could then justify increased expenditures for new acquisitions for your own military.
Absolutely. That's really what it's about.
Whereas if you said their troops were the good thing and the equipment was bad, it's really hard to, get your supporters and constituents money if you're spending your defense dollars on training.
Yes. And that's a very, very common thing that's happens even today. For example, this past week on Twitter, I saw someone several someones posting a picture of a Flight 3 Arleigh Burke destroyer. And I will confess that the Flight 3 is not a slim ship.
No.
The radar system, the Aegis radar system, is now hanging over the side, like it looks like the ship has developed its own beer gut. Perfectly valid. However, this is a state of the art missile intercept system. Like it'll knock almost anything out of the sky. There is something to be said for what was said next. People were complaining that the ship looked too bloated and that we need to build a new destroyer class. We probably need to build the new destroyer class because we physically can't stuff anything else into the Arleigh Burke. It is full to bursting. But the ship itself is fine. The ship itself has got 20 years of life minimum. One of the things that I do for funsies from time to time is I play the game Jane's Fleet Command, because I still haven't bought Harpoon again. Jane's Fleet Command comes out in 1999. It has all the
I just want to state that I love James, by the way.
yes, it has all the old bells and whistles you could expect to find: Ticonderogas, Spruances, Oliver Hazard Perrys, etc. It also has the Flight 1 Arleigh Burkes. The Arleigh Burke has got plenty of shelf life left. It's perfectly fine. We don't need another Arleigh Burke anytime soon. We got some time on that one. What we need to build right now is shipyards, so we can build more ships. But that happens a lot. Like we kind of oversell. We dramatically distort how technology works.
Yeah.
And what its advantages gives us. And to be clear, we have wonderful technology, and we should give more of it to Ukraine if we aren't going to use it on Russians. But like, it's not just the motion of the ocean; it's how you steer the ship.
Interesting.
And like that's kind of the thing.
I like the analogy.
Yes, one of the things I like is Laser Pig's videos from time to time. Even if even if he sends me scrambling to a reference book to double check the things he says from moment to moment, particularly when he talks about ships for some reason, like he gets weird ideas. But he makes entertaining videos. And I tend to agree with his assessments of people like Pierre Spray and John Boyd as being dramatically overrated. And if I hear one more corporate, see one more corporate person put the OODA loop on their LinkedIn page, I'm going to lose it.
Odd.
However, like one of the things I think people get really out of place is they like what I call the right-hand inset box of Wikipedia syndrome. They go on to Wikipedia because Jane's reference books are very expensive, and only Hetman's father seems to have a complete set. Outside of any...
not the newer ones either, but like I don't think my dad has bought a Jane's book probably in almost 20 years now. They're very expensive.
Oh, deeply.
Oh yeah, they're a couple hundred bucks.
One.
They're deeply. So like everyone else, I'm depending on Wikipedia for my unclassified statistics on vehicles these days. At any rate, they get into this mindset where they're like, this tank has this, and this, and this tank only has this, and this. So tank A will obviously win. And like, that's not how it works. Like and the example I always give is if I have a gun that shoots 1,000 meters and my opponent has a gun that shoots 500 meters, we still have to take the battlefield into account. If the battlefield's only 300 meters long, then the range of our guns isn't going to matter, right? So like...
Yeah, we used to call it soft factors. If you don't weigh in the soft factors, which probably are 2 to 3 times more important than the hard factors, the hardware, then you're an idiot, basically.
Yes.
And soft factors is things like training, motivation, morale, etc., etc.
All of these things kind of factor into the what happened this summer. Basically, is a whole lot of people who didn't know what they were talking about didn't really factor the soft factors in. And that's despite the fact that us and every other surviving credible analyst online, and I say surviving because you basically eventually say something stupid and then we find out you don't know anything. But every other surviving credible analyst online is going, guys, this is probably going to suck. So that what happened is, guys, this sucked. Ukraine, as Hetman pointed out, suffered an enormous amount of casualties. They didn't gain what they wanted to gain. And that's kind of what happened. And that's kind of dovetailed in.
I think that is expecting way too much for them, and also it downplays what they were able to accomplish. I mean, they were certainly able to make breaches in the Russian defense line, I believe they've attrited Russian forces considerably. This is not a decisive campaign at all. Time will tell, how.
This was the year.
Ends.
This was the year of the Rzhev meat grinder.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that
very much so.
That has kind of brought me to like what I have like felt this past month with regard to Ukraine, particularly in between the two episodes and what we've talked about. Like other things that we haven't talked about is Ukraine has continued to find new and interesting ways to humiliate the Russian Navy. Like at this point, I think it's just Budanov's hobby that he wants to like mess with the Russian Navy as much as possible. So they have continued to attack targets and blow up little Russian ships and all that jazz. It's getting silly at this point. Like, how do you lose to the country whose navy you took out in 2014 on the Black Sea?
Yeah, to a country that basically doesn't have a navy anymore.
Yeah.
And probably won't ever have one for a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah, so like those things have continued and happening, and like they've all kind of come to the background, and so a couple things have happened. And like, if you're familiar with Niels Puck Anders' YouTube channel, he is Dutch, has a pretty interesting set of perspectives on the war, and I usually enjoy when he puts out a video. However, he also works for a think tank in Holland as it stands, so he is sometimes guarded about what he says because he actually has to be an active military officer, which I appreciate. But he came out with a video a couple days ago that is titled "Ukraine is Losing the Information War to Israel," and a couple things have happened in the past couple months that have really given me cause for concern for Ukraine's ability to continue to fight in these set of circumstances. The first is Mike Johnson, which is the most ridiculous name in American politics since what's-his-face got indicted in Georgia, one of Trump's guys, whose name escapes me but was still hilarious when I heard it for the millionth time. Mike Johnson has become somehow like out of the mess that were the Republican speakership races. Like they couldn't agree, and somehow they pulled this jackass out of their hat all of a sudden. Like nothing happened. They can't agree on anything. And then suddenly they all vote for this guy. I'm like, what just happened? I feel like I just got mugged.
It's like, let's choose the stinkiest turd in the box, and that's the one we're going to put on the mantle.
And like there are a lot of Republicans who are truly atrocious human beings. So many of them were running for speaker, like Jim Jordan. However, they found this guy, and this guy is from Louisiana. He is a congressman in Louisiana. He is horrible on LGBTQ issues. He's horrible on, he's already trying to cause a showdown about funding Israel and Ukraine. He is probably going to get the government shut down at the end of this month, and I won't get a disability check for Christmas. So that'll be fun. And he is almost certainly... he's almost certainly a one of those people who got a whole ton of NRA money that came from Russia. And interestingly enough, he was connected with Kem Hand's The Ark Experience, where he got a whole bunch of money, spent a whole bunch of time getting tax dollars poured into this fake Ark with this lunatic museum displays. So I really appreciate when congressmen can go out of their comfort zone of getting pork for their district to get pork for other districts. So I suppose on that level he should be applauded. Anyway, he is now Speaker of the House, and one thing we can say for his predecessor is, while I have no love for what's-his-face, actually he's already so irrelevant I've forgotten his name.
I know, I forgot his. I'm trying to think of his name too. I can ask my significant other here, my girlfriend, if do you know?
I'm looking it up right now because I can't stand this. The previous Speaker of the House is Kevin McCarthy. That's it.
Damn it, McCarthy, of course.
Yeah. Here's the thing about Republican speakers. I know we're venturing out a little bit here, but this is important. Like there have been a series for quite some time. The last good Republican speaker who was actually capable was John Boehner. You'll remember Paul McCartney couldn't even get his district, or couldn't even get a new health care bill through with a Republican Congress and the Senate and the White House. So you've just had a series of spectacularly weak speakers from the Republicans who can't get anything done. But Kevin McCarthy got every Ukraine aid package through somehow. And that's obviously spent all of his political capital because he got tossed out with Tuesday's garbage. This is a problem going forward because the Republicans do not want to support Ukraine going forward. And this is a two-part problem because the money that people think we're sending to Ukraine isn't actually money going to Ukraine. It's really money that's being used to rebuy the weapons that we got out of storage and shipped off to Ukraine, so that we can keep our stockpiles up. The second problem is October 7th happened, which is terrible. I have to specify because someone will accuse me of being a horrible anti-Semite. October 7th happened, and Israel has begun a full-scale, just absolutely leveling Gaza. The thing about Israel is that Israel occupies a rather unique place in American politics. They have very powerful lobbies, pro-Israeli lobbies that pour a lot of money into American election campaigns, and this gives them a certain amount of preferential treatment. So we just sent a giant aid package off to Israel, for example, despite the fact that they have all the weapons they could ever want.
That's what I was just going to say. If there's any country that really doesn't need a whole lot of aid militarily from the United States, it's certainly Israel.
And
and they have a very robust defense industry, and a defense industry that's exporting a lot of arms to many different countries. I mean, many NATO countries. So they don't really necessarily need our help. They might, in the event of a massive attack, which theoretically shouldn't happen. With the treaties that they have with Egypt and Jordan. But even so, for what they're dealing with now, they don't need any help from us. Ukraine
yeah,
is a whole different issue.
yeah. So to kind of
I do. Mhm.
to kind of
Go ahead.
not belabor my point on Israel much longer, because I've obviously talked about that extensively on stream for a while now, and we'll be continuing to do so as long as people continue to be stupid. But here we are. To not belabor my point, unless all of the Arab countries around Israel get their shit together and learn how to coordinate themselves properly, they're not going to beat Israel. Israel will get the jump on them. Since historically all the Arab countries around Israel have never been able to get their shit together and get coordinated properly, it seems unlikely, particularly that they've had to endure the last 10 years of the Arab Spring, that they're going to do so now. So that issue's pretty well sorted. It's well in hand.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you on that. And also one thing that the commander has mentioned this on our previous streams. The whole Palestinian issue for the Arabs is not as big. They are very boisterous about it.
Yes, but the
But they're
Palestinians always
not.
get picked last for dodgeball.
They do, and not only that. One thing to point out, some of the worst things that have been done to the Palestinians, maybe in their history, actually in terms of numbers of deaths, have been done by other Arab countries. You have Black September, that happened with the Jordanians expelling them. You have the Sabra and Shatila massacres, which Israel sort of had a hand in that. They were basically acting. There's a really good film about it by a person who was there. It's called Waltz with Bashir. Essentially, the Israeli army were shooting signal flares up so that the Phalangite militia could go into the Palestinian camp and shoot everybody, so they could see what they were doing. So that's one of the dirty deeds that Israel doesn't like to admit.
Are we talking about Lebanon? I
But
had to step away.
this is Lebanon. Yeah,
Yes.
this is 1983, I believe.
The mid or the early 80s, yes. Uh, we will try to unravel Israel and Lebanon's relationship on stream. Um, Lebanon is a very incredibly complicated subject for which I would want a degree before I felt authoritative talking about it. Like a specific,
Lebanon is not an easy country to talk about because it's a really probably one of the most diverse, both sectarianly and also ethnically in the Middle East. And when you say Israel's relationship with Lebanon, you can't really state it as the country as a whole. Israel's relationship with the Shiite Lebanese, Hezbollah,
yeah, and there's
the Sunnis,
also a very
the Christians,
complicated
which is very good.
a complicated relationship with Palestine and Lebanon as well. So it's incredibly stupidly complex. Um,
Hmm.
and it fuels an awful lot of very like Lebanon is like the saddest stories on earth, I think, really, when you get down to it. And that was even before a huge portion of it just exploded in 2020 for no particular reason.
Yeah, people forget that Beirut used to be referred to as the
Paris.
Paris of the Middle East.
Yes.
And I was there before the wars, and it was a beautiful city. And, now it's basically a bunch of ruins.
Yeah, and it's a very huge tragedy too.
Yeah.
Lebanon was a thriving culture, and then the 80s happened. um, like disco died and Lebanon went out. So,
But I think the original premise of this part of our discussion is that Israel and Gaza sucked the PR world into it and left Ukraine sitting high and dry.
yes, and Ukraine is
so
incredibly dependent upon
Yeah.
dependent upon our support.
I think that this has less to do. It's not necessarily. I mean, there are, of course, the lobby groups that exist, the Israel lobby groups, but a lot of it doesn't have to do like, it's not like, I just want to state that it's not like Israel just like, hey, look at us, point all your cameras here. The media loves the Arab
Yes,
Israeli
like
conflict. They love the Israeli Palestinian conflict.
It generates viewership.
It is a
Much,
capital.
much more than the Ukrainian conflict because Ukraine is not well known, to people who are not historians of the region, and specifically, Ukrainian studies. I'm in Ukrainian studies, and I can tell you how small it is, as a multidisciplinary field. When I go to conferences, I see people that I know. When I look up conferences, I see people that I know. I mean, I'm not even a big person in this field, and I know on a first name basis some of the biggest people. So, it's one of those things. Ukraine is just not well known. And the weirdest thing for me, because I was, Daedalus can definitely tell you, the last, maybe almost 15 years of my life have been, dedicated to studying Ukrainian history. I mean, I have my own roots there, but it goes beyond that. And seeing all this, when the war started and seeing it on the news, especially seeing Chernihiv on the news, and seeing like CNN there and stuff, I'm like, really? You never knew where this was beforehand, and it's kind of, it's a little surreal to me. Part of, like, there's some of my friends, some of my colleagues say, oh, you should feel good about all the Ukrainian flags and all the like support, but I'd like people to know that Ukraine was a place before this war started. The news media doesn't necessarily know a whole lot about Ukraine. One thing to be clear, Ukraine is not a particular, like, it is a democracy. It's a very flawed democracy. It is a very corrupt country. And it is not a liberal country by any means. It is not a there's not a very large liberal people. It is really, really bad to be LGBT in Ukraine. It is bad to be any sort of visible minority. I'm not saying this doesn't justify Ukraine's fight against Russia. And Ukraine is not a Nazi country. Me and Daedalus, I have had whole episodes dedicated to this question. But, you know, Americans kind of, I feel like a lot of liberal Americans have the wrong idea about Ukraine. I feel like if they had visited it, you know, and actually, well, not just visit, you can't get the impression of Ukraine. You can't kind of understand the essence of it unless you live there for a bit. And, you know, I feel like if some more of them did that, they might not be hanging these flags and supporting it. I feel like that a lot of people want to, you know, see, like they maybe like they see Russia, you know, in American consciousness as this, like, you know, boogeyman, and you know they certainly are
Well,
to their
we went
neighbors.
through the whole Cold War, you know,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Russia and USSR were effectively interchangeable in our mental process.
Of course, but
Yes.
the
And
USSR, yeah, is such
so
a
all we're
different.
doing is continuing the Cold War with a proxy.
Of course, yeah.
There is, I think, a thing to be said, because like Hetman, like if you watched our channel trailer, you'll point out that I basically said this channel was birthed years ago in Hetman's basement by two guys who had no idea what they were doing, talking about history. And then we became actual historians, and we still have no idea what we're doing, but we're still here talking about history. But I can tell you for a fact that for 20 years now, or the first 5 of it, Hetman was like, Russia, Russia, Russia. And then one day it became Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. So,
of course, no. My interest in Ukraine, you know, Brand was it was birthed out of my, you know, interest in Russia, but you know, I lost. I became very disillusioned. That's a whole different, you know, story, but I became very disillusioned with Russia very, very quickly. And, well, not quickly, but, you know, towards around 2014, I gave up learning Russian as a second language. I mean, I was kept learning it to read it, but I gave up speaking it. And now, you know, actually, when I speak to my girlfriend's mother, who is Armenian, but she was born in Baku, so Russian is her first language, I'm using Ukrainian. And thankfully for me, she is obsessed with this war, and she is literally watching all of these Ukrainian news channels. And if you know Russian, if Russian is your first language, and if you really like are just not a lazy person, you can pick up Ukrainian. Russians, there's many, many Russian people who just, you know, absolutely, they just hear it and then they refuse to learn it. You know, on the Ukrainian side, it's the opposite because basically, you know, for historical reasons and also, you know, it being a republic in the USSR and then also a province in the Russian Empire, most Ukrainians, even now that they do Ukrainian, even though they've switched from Russian to Ukrainian, they still, prior to getting invaded, they spoke Russian with their parents. I know many such people. I can, you know, tell you most of them living in Chernihiv are of this example.
yeah.
But yeah, you know, it's one of those countries that you learn very quick that there isn't. Russia's, for one, it is, and I don't want to, you know, make blanket statements. There's a lot of beauty in Russian culture, but a lot of it is stolen. A lot of it isn't really made by ethnic Russians themselves, but by, you know, their constituent.
Well, let me kind
peoples.
of bring this in a little bit to talk about a kind of a broader concept I think is important. That's important to understanding a lot of these conflicts that are happening today. Diversity is a good thing so long as those parties that make up the diverse groups in a nation interact with one another.
Of course.
So and this gets into we all kind of have this experience here as white Americans, where you have that openly racist person though, but he likes Ben because Ben is one of the good ones. Or and a lot of people of color would
Yeah.
have the same experience in the reverse. The thing about Russia that is I think apparent immediately is that Russia's quite big and that it's clustered. So Russia is these disparate ethnic groups that are all scattered over all over the place. And now they're very well and truly outside the bounds of Russia themselves because of the history of the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire. And they don't necessarily interact with one another. So they don't necessarily all get along as well as they could. Um, and like you have those cases like the breakaway regions in Ukraine where they have hostility towards Ukrainians because they are in a certain sense isolated. So one of the things to really
That
get
and the fact that they're these areas too. I mean, they're isolated, but also you have you know even ethnically speaking, like it's really hard to define who is an ethnic Russian, who is an ethnic Ukrainian in Ukraine, because one, you have, you know, especially during Soviet times, but also during Russian imperial times, you have a movement of populations freely between those two countries. They
yes,
are both Eastern, or they're both Orthodox. They both largely, although Ukrainians might not want to admit it, and some Russians might not want to admit it, they're very similar in their worldview, in their cultural practices. They have similar religious traditions, similar pagan traditions that go further back that are now integrated into their Christian dogma and beliefs. Um, they are brothers in a sense. They're brothers that hate each other, but they are certainly brothers.
yeah, and like
Um,
the removing the abstractions from these things is kind of like, well, what if we could get everybody in Russia to stand in one of those weird church mixers where everyone starts awkwardly talking to one another and drinking weird fruit punch? And like obviously that's not feasible. So
no,
like this is unlikely to change. And like I want to point out while I am getting on this particular topic of Ukraine's need to be front and center is a media topic. Um, Kind of to get back to the original point. For example, I'm also sitting here waiting on tetherhooks for the news that Azerbaijan has invaded Armenia. I expect it to be any day now. I also expect it to get absolutely no media coverage whatsoever because I'm pretty sure there's only seven
I've been
people
really,
who can
it's
find
always a source
Armenia
of,
on a
yeah.
map, right? And I think three of them are in this conversation. And the other ones, well, at least one of the other ones is in the room with you, Hetman. So let's be frank. Armenia is probably in some
Yeah,
serious trouble. Um,
yeah. It's one of the things. It's always in the back of our minds. I've seen, I follow. I'm a Twitter user. I don't tweet that often, but I'm following a lot of pages related to the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, and I see a lot of distressing things, but I don't even tell Sveta, my girlfriend, because she works. She has relatives there. Her father's family, most of them are still there. She doesn't really, they'll tell her, if something really is imminent, but I don't want to stress her, and that's like the issue. But no, you're right. Um, the only way I could see Ukraine returning to the spotlight, though, is if Russia pulls something similar to what they did in Bucha. And to be honest, and I'm speaking with all of the, I don't know who invested it in me, but all the authority that I have, as a genocide scholar, as a war crimes scholar,
by the power vested in me by me.
but Bucha Izium, some of these things that have been happening in Ukraine, the vast majority of civilian deaths in the Ukraine war, and it's a horrible war. Civilians have suffered immensely, but the vast majority of them they are not like Bucha, they are not like Izium, and they're not like October 7th, or even actually to a large degree, they're not like the Israeli bombing of Gaza, which is more intense and more brutal. I hate to say it, but it's the truth. Than Russia's, bombings in Ukraine, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Ukrainian air defense prevents that from happening. But unless something really, really big or new happens, I don't think it's going to become upfront news. My biggest hope for Ukraine right now, obviously, of course, besides the hope that, it's able to win and take back all its territories, but my biggest hope is simply just that it's able to survive, that, that we're able, that the international community is able to continue to provide it with air defense, because that's key to Ukraine's survival.
Yeah.
To me, as long as, I know it's horrible to see all these regions taken, and I do, like everybody else who loves Ukraine, every Ukrainian, want to see them returned. But I would rather see Ukraine survive and not lose any additional territory, not lose its air defense and become basically one giant Aleppo.
What
Or
will happen
Grozny.
if Ukraine? What will happen if Ukraine is incapable of defending itself against Russia's bombardment, both artillery-wise and cruise missiles? And they've done a fairly good job of exhausting Russia's stocks to where they have to produce more missiles. But what will happen is that they will just bomb the country out. That is absolutely a fact.
Once Russia is able to use its air power, Ukraine doesn't have long for this world as a state. But as long as they're able to keep that up, as long as that is, at least that is done for them, then they will survive, and I think eventually they could outlast Russia in that regard.
So, like,
eventually this conflict might freeze, which would be beneficial to me. Like, a lot of people are stating that it would be much, much more beneficial to Russia, but I think it's just as beneficial to Ukraine. They can actually rebuild their economy a little bit. They can rebuild their depleted, their depleted military kit, their ammunition, and this is also affecting Ukrainian democracy. I mean, it's delaying elections.
although to be fair, I think
creating
Zelensky would
friction
win this
there.
pretty handily.
Yeah, but there's a lot of
a significant portion of the of Parliament wouldn't, but Zelensky would.
Yeah, but
also, everyone should be very impressed in chat how easily I was able to find Armenia on the map and take us back to Ukraine. Just saying.
Oh, someone special didn't see that. Yeah, you were sleeping.
So where is Dagestan?
Oh, God damn you.
Dagestan? Dagestan is right by Chechnya.
Yeah, I gotta go to Chechnya.
I know exactly where these places are. I'm just being
He's doing it to me.
I figured you knew that.
Dagestan, right here. Damn fucking thing. I found it. I can do it all day long. I know my maps.
I'm going to, before we get too far off track, I want to ask a question and see what you guys think. Why are the Russians making such a huge and hugely costly effort at Avdiivka?
Oh, really...
If you look at what they're losing, not just the numbers, but the type of equipment that's being destroyed there.
Yeah, it's a lot of their
that they
remaining
have.
high end stock.
Yeah, it's like the last of the T-80s and T-90s are getting sent in and getting blown to pieces.
My
Why are they
only
doing it?
that I'm not a Daedalus is much more of a military historian than me, but the only maybe guess that I have is perhaps that it is a cutting off a supply route, or you know that I mean that's kind of the only reason why I think that it's important. It also does push the front away from Donetsk a little bit, which is important,
Yeah,
for the
yeah, that
citizens
would
in
be
those occupied
a
territories.
real black eye for Putin if that falls.
Yes.
It
So
would be, yeah.
like looking at this here, my most immediate thought is I see an opportunity for an encirclement of a not insignificant amount of Ukrainian troops.
Okay.
The trouble with this particular thing is while I see that opportunity, I don't necessarily see a clear path to execution.
No,
Like,
that path doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's a
and
very good way of expressing it.
like this is one of those things that I've had a lot of trouble with when I look at how Russia has acted in this war. Is like they're basically the baby Hearts of Iron 4 player who sees the opportunity but does not know how to assemble themselves to do it. You saw that at the beginning of the war a lot too. You saw them try to
Hmm.
surround Kyiv. They had the opportunity. They started doing the things they needed to do, but they couldn't do it. You saw that when they bypassed particular towns. For example, at the town Hetman was staying in Chernihiv, or they bypassed it entirely because they were trying to open up a route to Kyiv. Uh, like
Hmm.
Russia
I mean, they
has
didn't necessarily bypass it. They laid siege to it,
yes,
but they did go around it with their troops in an effort to reach Kiev. I think had the situation not gone so dismally, had it not been for the bravery of the oh shit, it's a mechanized brigade there. Actually, maybe a tank brigade, armored brigade that
wasn't it?
was responsible for the defense of Chernihiv. Had they not done so well and picked their battles so well, particularly just by, you know, retreating and letting artillery, doing really good at spotting and letting artillery just destroy Russian armored columns. I mean, I think eventually Chernihiv would look a lot like some of the cities that we're seeing in the east now, and that would be just absolutely devastating to me.
Yeah,
I
like
mean,
every time I look at what Russia's doing, I kind of get the feeling that they have assembled a collection of half generals, like, and they all have the same half. That's the problem. Like you have generals that see what needs to be done, but they don't necessarily know how to do it. And this
Well,
is
that in part is because many of the senior generals are not military.
yes,
They're
no,
interior ministry. They were transferred because that's the group that Putin felt would stay loyal to him. He distrusts the army.
yes. His plan
And
was
so
to
you get
try
a
to
bunch of guys whose mind is all about maintaining internal security. And you say, well, it's a gun just like you use for that. Just shoot at Ukrainians as opposed to Russians.
yes. The one thing I would point out about the Russian military, is particularly the VDV, which is held up as a fairly elite force, is they did a lot more police work than they did anything else prior to this.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and a lot of their officers come from because that's a separate branch of the Russian military come from the internal ministry too, or at least they did before they all got killed. So
yeah,
yeah, but you look at this area and like they've invested a lot into it. So I think you have some sunk cost fallacy going on too. And like look,
Yeah.
you got they're holding a position up here and they're holding a position down here. And like theoretically, they should be able to close that trap and put a whole lot of Ukrainian forces in a bad situation. But again, they can't do it and they can't recognize that it's not going to happen. Like I feel there is a kind of like a debate that goes back and
Well,
forth.
is it they can't recognize, or is it that they're too afraid to admit to the boss that they can't?
That might be it too.
That's a good question.
Yeah, because
That's a good question.
Hooters has a reputation of being a shoot the messenger kind of guy.
Yes, how many guys that take to send a message? Just one. No, yeah, I think that's part of it. In
You know, it's as many people who have wound up dead from Putin. You know, it's he fires a lot more and ruins the lives of a lot more people than he does kill. I mean, like if it were Stalin, I think Stalin actually, for as terrible as he probably was more. I don't know. This is a really big.
you're about to
stretch,
try to
but
say that Stalin was a better boss.
maybe a better listener, but I don't really think that that's true. I mean, the failures that happened with Operation Barbarossa. I mean, all the intelligence that they were. That's a whole. You could have a whole episode on that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm not going to actually make a statement here. I'm going to pull back.
But that was a good choice.
I still feel like
it wasn't Stalin. It was Beria. Come on.
No, let's be perfect.
I still feel like though that Stalin is probably a more capable leader than Putin is.
Stalin knuckled down. Stalin eventually knuckles down and gets to the business of fighting the war. That you can say for him.
He does, and I think he's forced really to listen at some point, whereas Putin.
Yeah,
really...
things are going so bad that he finally has to turn the reins over to Zhukov.
Yes. Yeah. And there hasn't been a catalyst for that yet. And the other thing is, like, Russia's government now is it's a mafia. You are living large if you're an oligarch in Russia, and you have an incentive to stay living large. And generals get in on this too. So you don't want to bring yourself out of favor by being the guy who reigns on the parade. Surovokin did that, and we haven't seen him for a while. So that all of those things factor into
it. He probably was the one general that you know.
I know what I said when he came into when he was given command, but he's turned out to be the best Russian general so far.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Then we're not even,
the whole defensive line that's saving their ass right now was his idea.
Yes, like dude single-handedly is carrying the Russian army at this point, and he's not even in command anymore. But like you see this exact same attitude with Russia about Bakhmut. Like, what does Bakhmut buy you? But here we spent months on this. You functionally lost after Bakhmut, and Wagner goes sideways. Your best combat formation was lost to that, and they're doing that now. It feels like Bakhmut Part 2, really. Except
the stupid maneuvers didn't work at Rzhev. Let's try it somewhere else.
Yes, except at Bakhmut, you don't have the entirely flamboyant Prigozhin anymore, because Prigozhin had an unfortunate appointment with gravity.
That's another person I was just going to mention. You know, we hardly hear of him now. I kind of really wish he would have stuck around a bit longer. I wish that he would have been a bit more bold.
Yeah, Prigozhin was obviously a horrible person, and he looked like he got hooked one day by a fishing line, but he was good viewing, like, media-wise. Like, he would have been good for some mileage for Ukraine.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, Prigozhin was quite the character. So like the only other thing to kind of talk about is the quiet overtures that are being made about peace talks, and just how not into this idea Ukrainians seem to be.
I don't, know how true those quiet overtures are. I see this periodically happen in regards to this conflict. in an odd way, I want this to end very, very badly. And no, I mean that's I didn't mean it that way, but like, you know, I want this to end even at this status quo, and a real end maybe for a while, just because it's such an emotional roller coaster for me. It's so hard, but you know, I don't think it's going to end. I think that any real peace talks are unlikely, and any genuine, you know, talk of peace on the side of Russia is
Yeah.
it's not
Yes.
genuine.
Like here's the thing.
I know you two are both aware of who Operator Starsky is.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So when he was on In Time doing one of his weekly updates with me a ways back, Nick asked him the question, well, how do you see, or not how, but when do you see this all ending?
I was watching that day.
And
Yes.
yeah, and that was, you know, early on before the big offensive supposedly kicked off. And so everybody was all optimistic that, you know, oh, it'll just, you know, kick the anthill and everything will topple. And Starship said, no, at best, this will end in 2025.
Well, that's kind of what I was saying. Like the last 2 months is we need to settle in for another year or two of this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This is we're nowhere near end. I don't think. I don't think Ukraine's appetite to continue to try is gone. Russia. Here's the thing. Russia has obviously suffered egregious losses in this, but Russia can afford to and is willing to suffer losses. There's kind of
Well, it's not the oligarchs' kids that are dying in the trenches, so why should anybody care?
yes. So
Also, a lot of people from the minority republics that
yes, and the other
Putin,
thing to
quite
keep in
frankly,
mind is
doesn't
like there's
care
been
about.
a attempt to rehabilitate the Soviet army. Fact that their tactics were uh, excessive by our American standards. Um, they just lose a lot of people because they push in a very sometimes irresponsible way. Nothing's
Yeah.
changed in Russia. It's the same thing as ever. Russians are also therefore used to high casualties in war, and they've been used to these things since the Napoleonic era. That's also
The
another thing.
sad thing, though, to point out, yeah,
Is I watched the clip
the
on
sad thing
YouTube.
too that I must point out is that there are still people. Oh, go ahead.
I watched the clip on YouTube of the Napoleon movie and the Battle of Austerlitz, and oh my God, is it bad? But that's beside the point. I just
Yeah, I'm
thought of
looking at
that.
it going, that looks more like Eylau than it does
Yes, I'm like
Austerlitz.
that. Like, is this the right thing? I had to double check to see if the cannon and icing actually happened at Austerlitz and not Eylau, because I know it happened at Eylau, right? But apparently, like 3 guys died from cannon fire on frozen lakes in Austerlitz. I'm like, wait, what? Uh, but that's beside the point. I'm sorry. I just thought of that because Russia was involved at Austerlitz. Anyway, yeah, go ahead. What's the sad part, Heaven?
Well, the sad part is there's many Ukrainian officers as well that fight much in the same way that Russia's, that the Russian officers fight as well, and that is an issue for Ukraine. It's a army in flux that is kind of a hybrid of these two traditions.
Yeah.
And Ukraine
And the
can't
group
afford.
that is going to be the majority thinking that way are the field grade officers.
Yeah.
Yeah. However,
And
that
that's where it gets really dangerous.
yeah,
My
I've had a fairly unique experience. An incredibly close friend of mine was recently promoted to major, and she is currently attending the year long. Basically the army sticks you in a school for a year, and you get another master's degree because you've probably already earned a master's degree to get this promotion in the first place. So I have had unenviable experience of being yelled at, being personally held accountable for the military history curriculum that the United States Army is using, even though I had no hand in designing it. In particular, I am being yelled at about Clausewitz and Jomini uh, on a fairly weekly basis at this point. But I've also had like the interesting experience of being asked to look at essays that are being written for these classes and the essay prompts in particular. And whoever writes these essay prompts has got to go. Like,
Yeah.
pretend that you're writing for the Chief of Staff of the United States Army about what military innovations came about by Napoleon. And I'm like, first of all, to rise to this position, you should already know this. Like, I'm not entirely certain why one would have to be briefed. But here we are. Like, this is a truly ridiculous essay prompt.
Yeah, some of them, when I was at Naval War College, some of them were, you'd just sit there scratching your head. It's like, how the hell did you come up with this whack job question?
Yeah, I now better understand why majors like to subject everyone to death by PowerPoint. It's just an unfortunate side effect of the education.
Yeah.
So that kind of brings me to where I want to end this, and kind of a change in how I am philosophizing. Two guys talking history, talking about current events, which seems at this point oxymoronical, but this has become a very significant part of our brand that other people know us for. Um, when we started, kind of made an executive decision, and Hetman agreed that we weren't going to do much more than one thing on Ukraine a month. Because A, it's very difficult to generate enough substance without talking about the same thing, particularly now that the war is kind of stagnant, to justify content. And content for content's sake is either, stupid, or in this particular case, ghoulish. And that's been the philosophy I have approached, and I just picked that up and kind of went the same for Armenia, and did the same for Israel. Those being principal things I chose for us to cover, and also Hetman kind of dropped Armenia on me, but that's beside the point. Because I have this particular feeling, and because it is in my mind a vital security connection for the rest of Europe and by extension the United States, I'm going to try to talk about Ukraine a little more, both with everyone assembled and by myself. So the other
I
thing
think
is,
one good way we can raise awareness of it is actually, I mean, you and I have done sort of little bits of Ukrainian history. The thing that I've thought about doing is, and I've told you about bringing in some of my friends
yes,
in
I was about
Ukrainian
to say,
studies.
I absolutely am
Um,
going to start hounding you about setting those things up. Uh,
yeah,
because
it's a
A,
bit
I
it's
want
a
to
bit of
really,
an yeah,
I want
it's
to
a
get
little bit of an issue getting them to on board because of their busy schedules, but we certainly can do this.
uh,
I know a lot of people, so
the other thing I feel at this point is I have to get and you might know how to do this, Commander. I want to talk to Operator Starsky if he's willing, uh, because I feel uh, he had unique perspectives, and also he is incredibly entertaining to have around if you watched him on In Time
Yeah.
or on the Shills where he's currently hanging out from time to time too. So yes, I do watch you guys. I just don't necessarily say much because I'm working on other things. Anyway,
Yeah.
uh, yes, I want to see if Operator starts to be willing to talk to us. Um, and I feel like he probably you two got along pretty well back then when
Oh,
I
yeah.
was running.
Yeah.
So I feel like if I mention that I know Nick and Commander McMillian, he probably will answer our text.
Sure.
So that there is that. The other thing is, uh, I'm still appalled by the general public's understanding of Israel and the kingdom of Israel back in the day in the Iron Age. So I have been beginning the task of going through all of my very old and ancient and decaying books and looking for new sources to begin to talk about the region of Cana in general, because it's actually a really cool story that no one knows about because they just have the biblical one. And we're going to start pushing a better understanding of Israeli history and the history of the region in general, because good Lord, are people terrifyingly unequipped for that discussion. Um,
Very, very true.
uh, if you are, some of you in the audience were here for the other night where I basically spent an hour and a half raging out about the entire state of the discourse. Um, the thumbnail is fantastic. So all of these things are a lot of what we're going to start pushing. I don't want to do this though in such a way that that it's ghoulish. So I'm not gonna have us do things when we don't have something to say. But like we've just spent about 2 hours now condensing a month of actually a fairly decent amount of news, uh, and not covering it in significant detail because we wanted to talk about why the thing that we've been talking about for 4 months didn't happen the
Exists.
way people thought it
Yeah.
was going to. And like I knew that coming into the day was going to be the case. So that's kind of where I'm going to approach this from now. Is I'm going to take things a little bit more focused on Ukraine and try to get more guests. And I would love it if you could join us for some of those things, Commander. And
Sure. Yeah, just let me know and I'll try to be there.
I will start assembling a schedule. Obviously, the more people I add, already between figuring out my good health days and days that Hetman is responding to messages, I'm giving you a hard time again. Is already a challenge. But obviously, the more people I have, the more balancing I'll have to do. But that is kind of what I'm going to approach. And I obviously put together that huge Twitter thread and the community post today, which you can read. If you don't follow us on Twitter, it's in the doobly-doo down below. Hetman, you should actually send me your personal Twitter because I don't have it on my personal Twitter or our own two guys Twitter account, so that you can at
I will
least
do that.
see what I'm doing on a daily
Of course.
basis. I'm also trying to pick certain fights with people who say terrible things. Some of them have taken the bait. Anyway.
So before
sorry.
we sign off, I wanted to point out two things that are pertinent to Ukraine right now that we haven't mentioned.
Oh, very well. Go ahead.
Sure. Number one, Kherson area on the other side of the river. We know that the Ukrainians have landed forces there and established a very narrow bridgehead. What we do know is in the past week, they have started sending over mechanized forces.
Yes, I did see that. I was
So that's potentially a new front to open up.
that's if it opens up in a big way, I was going to pick that. However, like
Yeah.
the defenses are weaker there, yes, but the situation is muddier there too at the moment. So like if that's going to develop into a thing, it'll be mid-December at best.
Yeah. The second thing is the question of I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's like the North Star pipeline. You remember that early on that was blown up. Yeah, Nord Stream. Thank you.
Oh yeah, that stupid article from this week. Go ahead.
Yeah. The allegations that the Ukrainian special forces are the ones that did the attack, and just coming out of the blue, and the evidence is sketchy. My personal sense is that it's a Russian disinformation operation to
actually at this
try
point,
to
considering
change people's opinions.
How often the Washington Post has accused Ukraine, I think the Washington Post blew up the pipeline, and they're trying to cover it.
Yeah, more than likely.
like it's been like 4 times the Washington Post has tried to blame Ukraine for this at this point. I'm like, why? What? Like this is ridiculous at this point. Like Ukraine should sue.
Yeah, but I think it was important to at least mention that, since it was in a thing that came up in the past week. People may be aware of it, and just to voice our opinion that we think it's more BS.
Yes. I did actually make that comment on Twitter that I think the Washington Post is covering up their own complicity. Because this is absolutely ridiculous. So before we really sign out here, we have had sparse questions. I want to jump up a few minutes to Shane, if you're still here. Yes, Lebanon was the nice place in the Middle East prior to the 80s. Anyone else who has any questions, I want to give a couple minutes for that to percolate before I sign out for the evening. But yeah, we're kind of going to start changing our tone on this. Like, I've been approaching things rather randomly, especially last October when I was trying to get things organized through my surgery. And it works out pretty well for us. We're doing pretty good, I think, especially for like the style of the show and the saturation of the market. We're having nice growth. Please subscribe, like the stream. It makes me happy.
Yeah, it helps us a lot. And
Hetman can attest every once in a while. I'll send him the update of where we're at.
Yeah.
The other thing I think is kind of like useful to talk about is we are going to continue men's issues, which theoretically Hetman is preparing notes for. I have consulted a couple therapists on that I'm getting notes for. Hopefully we'll do that this week. That was in the pipe of discussion. Also, we have an outstanding thing to do, Hetman, that we have put off for far too long that we should do this week. And I will talk to you about a date more accurately later, but we owe everyone a couple rounds of Rome Total War to see who is the victorious general.
We do. Yeah, we have not done that yet.
It'll probably be me, let's be perfectly frank, but maybe Hetman's been practicing.
I need to get some practice in.
Yes. And as
kind of busy with kids and stuff.
Yes, as for the holidays are fast approaching, and everyone gets busy.
We should do a Christmas episode, Christmas like around that time, maybe.
Well, we will almost certainly be doing things around Christmas, but I don't necessarily know what they are yet. Because, like, so for example, every year for Christmas, at Thanksgiving, we'd have turkey. So every year for Christmas, we would have a beef sirloin for Christmas dinner. Or as our friends in Europe call it, the fillet. So this year I have talked my aunt into getting her to turn the very expensive cut a fillet over to me so that I can try to make Gordon Ramsay's beef Wellington, which will be an adventure that I will be prepping for much of the rest of the month.
That sounds great.
So far, like when I got 2020 rolled around and I was rather ill and spending an awful lot of time in the beginning of 2020 unrelated to COVID in the hospital, which by the way was an exciting thing to do, to be in a hospital in February. Things got dark quickly. However, I started watching cooking videos and I'm like, wait, I can do this. So I've been on a 3-year journey of teaching myself how to cook. I've, for example, successfully done Julia Child's Buff Bourguignon. So far, so good. But this is going to probably be the most work-intensive and complex thing I've tried yet. And that was just me filling airtime for questions, which seem not to be coming. I'm going to thank everybody for showing up tonight.
Thank you, Pippa, by the way.
and wish you a very good evening.
Thank you, Palm Ben.
One more thing before I leave. We have begun a TTRPG game of Star Trek Adventures in the Two Guys Talking History Discord, of which we had the first game today. We have space for 2 more players if you are a subscriber of the channel and want to join our Discord. We have space for a security officer and a dedicated first officer for the ship. And the commander is the captain, and he apparently had a good time today, or just lied to me and said he did. So, if you're interested in that, go ahead and pop into the Discord server and give me a tag so I can get you situated.